What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the stream. I am Ian Douglas. I'm the author of the website Tech Interview Guide, and tonight I got a whole bunch of friends here, and one of them I need to change his name real quick. So bear with me as I go find Jake from State Farm and change his name. There's Jake. There's Jake. Jake, how many times have you been called Jake at State Farm?
I lost track a decade ago.
Good times. I was gonna say, I bet it's more than once.
It went from Jake the Snake to Jake from State Farm pretty much overnight thanks to those commercials.
I want to see you in like really long hair and I want to see you in really long hair and actually dress up like Jake the Snake. That'd be great. Actually, get really long hair with the snake, but then like the khakis from Jake at State Farm.
That's the way to go.
Yeah, cool. Well, everybody, this is Jake Cohen, and next to him is, well, actually, we'll just kind of go clockwise. So under Jake on Twitch, that you'll see is Tyler Lundgren, and under Tyler is Alyssa Lundgren. They are siblings, and up and to the left of Alyssa is Norm Schultz. And all of these folks were students at the Turing School of Software and Design, and I specifically kind of reached out to them because I wanted to do a whole segment on, hey, guess what? You want to get into the tech industry. There's more out there than just software engineering jobs. And so I collected a pool of friends to talk about the kinds of roles they got into straight out of Turing. So Turing's a 7-month boot camp where you're learning really deep dive software development, mostly web development, and how all of these folks pivoted into careers that weren't web development. And some of them have since moved on to second and or third jobs in the time since they've graduated, and they may or may not be doing full-time software development still. And so I kind of want to, we'll just kind of go around the group and ask some questions kind of as we go. Let's talk a little bit about like background, like what were you doing before Turing? What were your hopes going through Turing? Like what did you want to sort of be when you grow up? And then, I mean, I still don't know that one myself, but what role did you get into? And so we'll start with just those to kind of get us going. So Jake, we'll start with you. So you eventually landed on data science, but like what were you doing before Turing? And then what was your hope going through Turing? Like what kind of career did you envision for yourself?
So I spent about a decade doing kind of tech support, help desk type work, some server administration, and really ended up kind of just doing a ton of kind of technical and process writing. And I had done programming beforehand, but it had been a good decade since I had actually written anything worthwhile. So I kind of wanted to get out of the area of doing technical writing and more back into something where I could actually work in a programming language again.
Okay, cool. And then what was your first job then when you got out of Turing? And how did you land in that role? And then how did it feel like getting into that kind of role based on what you wanted to be doing?
Yeah, so the way I found it was almost kind of interesting because it was, I had the specific skill sets that they couldn't find anywhere else. Is that there was kind of a data science and data analytics team that had someone that they work in a lot of Python and SQL, and someone they needed a web app, and someone just kind of tried to use websites to develop their own web app, and they did a great job making something that like worked and was functional and everything, but at some point it needed to scale up into the actual language. But they ended up leaving the company for a different job, so they didn't have anyone that actually understood the tech stack that it was built on. So I was pretty much brought in just as someone who understood Django and could talk through how it worked and stuff. And ended up it had to get transitioned into C# was the language. I'd done a little bit of C++, I think, in high school, and a ton of like Java. So it wasn't too bad to try and transition over to like learning C#, and I ended up kind of helping try and develop the tool. As I tried to teach them how the Python app was running, and they tried to teach me how to build something in C#.
Great. So all that Ruby on Rails training I ground in you completely out the window.
Completely out the window.
Right,
Yeah, no, I did almost none of that.
That's funny. But I mean,
the basic data structure of like a web app like helped, but
right.
the Ruby specific stuff almost was not there. But
yeah, for sure. And Django, and were you doing .NET with the C# code?
yeah.
Yeah, so those are pretty much MVC design pattern frameworks. So I mean, a lot of that knowledge is going to transfer. So cool. All right, let's move on to Norm. So Norm, what were you doing before Turing, and what was kind of your goal, like getting through Turing, and then where did you end up?
Got it. I was at the tail end of a teaching career. I taught for 14 years, and you get to a point where you want to do something different, and you get frustrated with the industry a little bit. That's a whole nother podcast. But basically one of the teacher friends that I had, her significant other had been through Turing, and I've always been the computer guy, been people's IT support, and buy a house. The first week I'm crawling through the house running network cable and stuff like that. So it just seemed perfectly natural. Like, what a great idea. And learning what was going on in the industry, that software development is a skill that can take you to a lot of different places. So it just seemed super interesting. And then went to a try coding and was hooked, just like it was obvious.
Awesome.
And my goal, I don't know that I had a specific goal. It was more like to successfully get out of teaching and not revert back to being a teacher. I remember at one point while I was going through Turing, having a conversation with one of my teacher friends, and them asking me, did I let my teacher license lapse? And I told them I deliberately did, so that I wouldn't just take another teaching job, that I could kind of get off of it almost like a drug.
Nice. Cold turkey.
They were surprised that I had really done it, because they were in the same boat and they renewed their license. So anyway, I don't know if that answers your question.
Oh, it does. And then what was your role coming out of Turing then?
So I got hired with Aetna as a QE. At the time it was a QA, but the quality industry has changed a lot in software development over the last couple of years, and it's still in the process of changing, and it's changing completely at Aetna too. So when I was initially hired, it was more of a traditional QA role at a company. We had our own quality apps, so basically we were kind of arbiters and maintainers of a separate testing app. And then, we were the gatekeepers. Code had to go through us before it went to production. And that's totally different now. So that's a different subject, but that was my initial job.
Cool. Awesome. And then let's go to Alyssa. So Alyssa, you went through the front-end development program at Turing. So learning all, React and JavaScript and all the HTML and CSS. And then like Jake, threw all that out the window. Tell us a little bit about your journey and where you ended up.
Yeah. So before Turing, pre-Turing, I had studied business at the University of Colorado at Boulder and worked in advertising, studied marketing and management, so sort of had like a business, marketing, advertising background. Helped a friend found and run a business for about 5 years, a brewery here in Boulder.
Cool. Which one was that?
The Fate Brewing Company.
Okay.
So it was a brew pub, and we had lots of fun, innovative beer, and it was a wonderful experience, but sort of felt like, okay, that was the end of that exciting chapter, sort of entrepreneurship, and I was just looking for what was next. Then I became a paralegal, which is kind of like out of left field, but that was my next career jump. And then my brother, Tyler, was doing the back-end program at Turing and found it, exceedingly interesting and challenging, and encouraged me to go to try Turing, try coding. So I did that, and once again was hooked, and so grateful that I did that. I've always been sort of interested in business, obviously, and had always been also interested in technology. And so was really glad to get the experience in tech and sort of make that entrance for myself into the industry.
Right.
So when I was going to Turing, I think I was sort of thinking, pre-conversations with my brother, I was thinking like, okay, I want to be a front-end engineer, looking for a job in React, and sort of keep my focus to what I know. And he really encouraged me to think a little bit bigger, and that I don't need I could think of myself as a full stack engineer. I could think of myself even getting a back end role. And then, he also encouraged me to look into DevOps as well. And so that's the role that I took following Turing. I got a DevOps engineer role with a company called Central. We are a defense contracting company. So we work with the Space Force. In the lab that I work at, sort of like an incubator of applications for the Space Force.
That's awesome. How did you convince them? It's like, hi, look at me, I'm a front-end developer, to get into a DevOps role. What was that like?
I don't know.
I don't know.
No, I told them like, I'm looking for my first job. I'm coming out of Turing. Like this will be my first technical role. And they, I think, just wanted, someone with the right attitude and can do, and just gave me a chance.
I love that. I had a comment on LinkedIn today that I saw, where someone was like, I went and interviewed with this company and I knew that I didn't have the experience that they wanted. But they told me right off the bat, like, you've got the attitude that we want, you've got the passion that we want. You don't have all the skill that we want, but that's okay. We're going to train you on that. And I'm like, yes, companies need to invest in that.
Yes. And then you can make them the way that you want them,
Yeah,
rather than then coming with bad habits.
Yeah. Cool. Last but not least, Tyler, tell us a little bit about your journey.
Before Turing, I was kind of all over the place. I had worked in construction. I was in the Army. So pre-Turing, I was in the Army and then got out. I had an economics degree. Sorry, there's a big echo, so I'm like,
ooh, I hate that.
Oh, no worries.
Yeah.
It may help just to take the things off your ears just while you're kind of giving us your background there.
Okay. Yeah, that's better. Yeah, so I had an economics degree, and so coming out of the Army, I really knew that I had to find a path forward, right? Like, I needed to do something with my life. And that kind of led me to looking into data science through that economics background. And to do data science, you at least need a little bit of programming, right? Like you need, the libraries are in Python. And so I started looking at the different schools. Turing was for me the obvious choice. And so that's how I selected it. I didn't really have any goal for Turing, except that I knew that I needed to build a life for myself. And that was really that prime motivating factor. I kind of intuitively understood that, like, all you really needed to do was get your foot in the door, right? Like, get into tech. Tech's this huge area these days. Like, just get your foot in the door. So coming out of Turing, I really had kind of a broad focus on requirements for a job. It was basically just anything that was slightly developer related that would get me into the industry. And then somebody in Jake and I's cohort knew of this position and got me an introduction with one of the people on the staff there. So I'm a sales engineer, and that was the first job that I took out of Turing. I think the first job was pitched a little bit differently than what it ended up being. It was pitched at like 50 to 75% dev and like 25% sales. It was not that at all. It was maybe like 5 to 10% dev, 90% sales. But it's really led to, I think, an interesting journey in that something that I struggle with day to day is like this concept of not being a dev. And I think this is an important subject to bring up because, like, you shouldn't tie yourself to any one specific job role, right? It's okay to be in sales, It's okay to be in any of these positions that we're in because we're all building good lives for ourselves now.
And it's, not just what you enjoy, but it's also something that you're finding value in, the company's finding value in, like the quality of life based on like just comparing like what you've got now and what you had sort of pre-training. Hopefully drastically different for you. I mean, that was kind of the whole point of putting you through Turing, but you know, just there are so many paths, and we got someone in chat, Net Frazier, mentioned, you know, that they're also in a QA kind of role themselves, and they went through like security DevOps kind of QA stuff, and there's so many paths out there. And I say on the stream all the time, like tech is like you're signing up for lifelong learning, and it's this giant choose your own adventure of you get to choose like whatever you want. Now there is some amount of privilege in saying like, oh yeah, you can just go choose whatever job, because that first job is the hardest job to get. So let's kind of go back around the group. Maybe we'll go in reverse order this time. We'll go like Tyler, Alyssa, Norm, and Jake. Tell us, what was your interview process like, and how long did it take you to get that first job? Like what was the interview process for that specific role like for you?
Yeah, for mine, I would say it was a little bit irregular for the sales engineer position. That specific one was a little different than both of the others that I've had since. It was a little drawn out. I think they were unsure, kind of hiring a junior. And so it was really like just trying to convince them to take a chance.
How did you convince them? Like what did you say that really won them over?
That was such a long time ago now. Or at least it feels like it. I think vulnerability and openness, right? And I think like certainly there's some amount of like intelligence and insight that goes into the way that you're answering the questions, but you know, trying to convey who you are as a person, right? And what you're going to bring to the table.
Yeah, that's definitely it. Like, tell them, this is how I'm going to like help the team. This is how I'm going to help the business. This is how I'm going to bring something to you. A lot of entry level devs, they go in and be like, well, I don't know this. I'm going to need help with this. It's like, well, stop pointing out all the bad stuff. Stop pointing out all the negative stuff. Tell them what you are going to bring. And I think I can definitely win them over. How long would you say that it took, like between, you know, like starting the interview process, so whenever you started actually interviewing to actually getting that job, how long approximately do you think that took?
Yeah, so 2 out of my 3 took about 2 months.
Okay.
The third one, which was really referral based, took maybe 3 weeks, but I would say that's out of the ordinary. Yeah.
It's nice when it's, you know, someone that you know kind of gets you that in path for sure.
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks, Tyler. Alyssa, tell us a little bit about your like interviewing, and again, like how'd you win them over on the DevOps role?
Yeah. So actually, I was putting together. I'm going to be speaking at a Mod 4 class on Wednesday. So I was like preparing sort of a slide deck, and I went back to a Slack message that I sent to you when I got this first job, and it includes all of the details about me getting that job. So I submitted 159 applications.
Wow.
I got 26 rejections, so over 100 ghosts. I got 1 offer that was rescinded. But my role with Central was actually I sat down one-on-one with you, Ian, and got your insight on, you know, getting a job in Boulder and technology in Boulder, and you recommended that I go to Meetup. So that was actually how I got my role, as I met the founder of the company that I work at a Meetup. So my process was about a month, and did have sort of like a, you know, a technical assessment, and then sort of like a cultural assessment as well.
Awesome. And what do you remember what I told you about going to meetups at the time?
You basically said, you know, Boulder is has a great tech industry, and they're, you know, people are highly connected in Boulder, and they go to meetups, and I want to talk to people and meet people in person. And at that time it was in person. And that was just such good advice for me. So yeah. Thank you.
The advice has since shifted to telling people they're called meetups, not show-ups. Like, you got to go with the intention of actually meeting people and actually networking. Like, just showing up and like standing in the corner and like listening to the talk, like, yeah, you'll learn some things, but the whole point of the meetup is to actually network with folks. So yeah, good deal. Norm, tell us a little bit about your journey. What was your interview timing? How did you get into like the QE kind of role? What was that interview process like for you?
Yeah. So the interview process is the same as a dev.
Okay.
Cultural interview first, then tech part, though it was take home, and then live coding, and then meeting the team. So, somewhat arduous. I would say, I was trying to think of how to summarize like how it happened. And what I came up with was there were really two things that solidified my getting the job at Aetna. One was I spent a lot of time working with the people at Turing and the outreach, being very clear about what I was looking for and just being kind of on their radar. I took a few of them to coffee to get to know them, and they kind of understood really deeply what I was looking for, what kind of personality I had that would lend itself to the work. And then also trying to just help them with things like, oh, you know about this job, actually I know of somebody else who would be a great fit, let me connect them with you. And so that helped me greatly, because when I got the interview with Aetna, they also behind the scenes talked to Turing and said, do you have anybody that would be good for us? And Turing, they gave Aetna my name as well. So well, we already know about Norm, I guess we need to take him very seriously. So they ramped up the interview.
Great.
But also the second part was it was just a really natural fit. Like unusually natural fit. I would say that some people get into QA as a stepping stone to software development, but if you look at actually working in quality, it kind of takes a certain kind of personality, and I just have that personality. It's almost like, I don't know, if you would be thrilled about finding some scandal in your neighborhood that you could call the newspaper about, if that like really jazzes you, then
love it. So you're on the Nextdoor app all the time, aren't you?
Well, I don't know, but that kind of mentality of please let me find something wrong so that I can do something about it.
That's great.
That is just the QE, quality mentality, and so I had that a lot. So it was an obvious fit.
Yeah. I've told people on the stream a ton of times that I have an enormous amount of respect for people that take QE and QA roles, because for those that, even if you want to use it as a stepping stone to get into tech and get into that next role, it makes you such a better engineer, because you understand the implications of, if I change one thing over here, it's going to have this ripple effect and it's going to affect a ton of stuff over here. You have this broader knowledge, whereas a dev, we're focused on building this one little thing and that's all we know. Where you spend any amount of QA, QE kind of time, and you understand how that has implications on so much more around you. Between that and DevOps, like, I swear you two are like probably the smartest of all of us on the call right now, just for the awareness factor of, how all these things work and how they all communicate and stuff, where as a dev, like, I get hyper focused on my one thing and I'm good at that one thing, but I don't always understand those other kind of deeper implications of things. So yeah, I have a huge amount of respect for folks in that role. And you're right, you have to have pretty tough skin in that role too, because telling a dev like, hey Tyler, that code you wrote, that's garbage, that doesn't work, and it's going to break this thing over here, and like immediately our defenses go up and it's like, no, my code's fine, all my tests pass. It's like, well, they pass, but it doesn't mean it's not going to break like 6 other systems, like, yeah.
Totally. At Turing, they teach us all, that testing mentality. And I one of the things I thought of is like the quality mentality is, when you see a test fail, you're excited. You're like, oh, this is awesome. A test failed. Whereas a normal-ish, I'll put it that way, dev mentality would be, oh crap, a test failed.
Right. That's awesome. That's great. And Ned Fraser says in chat, Norm is right on with this type of personality needed for sure. Jake, so tell us a little bit about like the timing of your interview process and how you got into data science, and like sort of that transition into the role where you ended up.
Yeah, so I think before I got hired at my company, I interviewed at a lot of places for a long time, and they dragged out forever for all my interviews. And through all of them, every single company was entirely different, not even remotely similar for any of the interview processes.
Interesting.
But the one I had for Comcast was particularly odd because, like I said, they really needed someone to just kind of fill this temporary transition role. So it was like a contracting thing where like I was hired through a contracting company who just kind of made sure I knew the like general tech stack of like, do you have experience with this? And then got brought into an office straight up to the director, like the director right under the VP, and they're just like, here they brought in their head data science guy who brought over a laptop with the code, and they're like, can you explain what this code is doing? And
no pressure.
No pressure, nothing there. But it was very casual because it was originally going to be 3 months. That ended up being like a 6-month contracting position that was originally just supposed to be, can you make a couple additions to this, maintain it, explain it to our other team? And so then it was like, yeah, I can explain like what the code is doing here, like how this is kind of structured, where this is going. And they're like, sure, that seems good enough for this like temporary contracting thing. And then ended up, which made it more like a 6-month interview process then, because I was a contractor for that period for the project. And like ended up building like a portion of the code in C#, doing like it was something that does like business case and financial analytics. So I ended up doing some like multi-threading C# code, which was cool. Nice. And then they're like, what else can you do? Like, we have roles here and would love to like keep you on in something, just like, what is your skill set? And so I ended up taking interviewing then for an analyst role where I was specialized toward kind of a market development area. As like a specific area of the role. And so that's kind of a little bit of technology shift, because it's actually less Python, more SQL, because there's a ton of just different data connections and more things, and much more data kind of visualization stuff. So we like have Tableau, and just, can you like tell the story and build something that like, it's much more kind of, can you build something that helps the business and like understanding that, than it is like the actual coding part.
Interesting.
So ended up kind of falling into that because that was some of what the teams needed at the time. And I've since learned that every single project we get is unique and completely different, that 3 months from any given time period, I'm working on code that is completely different for a different purpose than I was the 3 months before. And yeah, but no, I kind of just like the data science, data statistics part of it, and kind of building some of those things that go with it.
Very cool. Awesome. Cool. Thanks, Jake. Alyssa, so DevOps means different things to different companies. For the sake of our viewers, can you describe what your company envisions as what DevOps is and what you kind of do on a day-to-day basis? I'm a little bit curious too, like the dev in DevOps implies that you're doing some amount of development. Historically, in my experience, that development tends to be more around automation and so on. Can you tell us a little bit about like what your day-to-day kind of entails?
Yeah, so I have moved into the product owner position on my team. So took that role about a year ago. So I'm still on the same team. The team that I'm a part of is called the Capability Integration and Deployment team. So the way I sort of think about it is we're sort of platform as a service. We have this data that's available at the lab, and the government says, hey, we have this need, we've identified this need. And so they write a contract and they award that contract to some development team. It's usually like SciTech or Lockheed Martin. And that team comes into the lab, and we sort of represent the lab and provide platform as a service to these vendor teams who come in to exploit this certain kind of data and address this certain need that the government has identified. So our team is responsible for, on the capability and integration and deployment team, we're also the DevSecOps team, so we're sort of like multi-purpose a little bit. But we sort of are responsible for providing a Kubernetes environment, maintaining that environment in our, we're air-gapped, so in our on-prem environment, which is sort of our lab, and then also in our operational environment on an Air Force base. So we're responsible for providing the tooling, to the vendor teams that come in. We onboard them, help them with integration, support them in architecture, make sure that we're encouraging them, kindly to use containers and move away from sort of VMs, and improve the automation. So we sort of are responsible for the tools in general, the documentation and the processes associated with their development, and then supporting them in their deployment. So sort of tying together the development and then the operations as one.
Awesome. When you were actually in the DevOps role, how much coding would you say was actually part of your role at the time?
It was not a lot. As the most junior person on the team and as the person with the least amount, the newest and the most junior, I was given sort of a lot of documentation tasks. So I think that that was probably one reason that I was like, well, my vision for my future is more aligned with strategy and the product more than necessarily the tooling. So it was an easy step for me into the product ownership role. So I think that it was probably like 25 to 50% on a good day actually writing code. But it was mostly like understanding new tools and how would they fit in our tool chain and how would we make them available to the vendor teams who come in.
Awesome. On the theme of automation, Norm, I imagine in like any kind of quality environment, you're going to try to build as much automation as you can into how you're picking all these commits and making sure everything's working well together. Can you talk a little bit about the kinds of actual coding that you get involved in your role?
Yeah, and that's changed. So one of the biggest things at Aetna that has changed is in my time there, trying to de-monolith their apps. They weren't a monolith app as in a total app, but they were monolith backends.
Okay.
That were, doing too many things at once, and then a separate testing app that is its own repo that tested multiple backends, and so that was kind of a testing monolith as well. And so they've moved away from that and now made more microservice architecture. Set up more of a microservice architecture, single responsibility APIs, and then made as a rule that all of the testing, including the integration testing, has to be in the repo of the API that's being tested. And so that created challenges, with not repeating yourself across repos and deciding smartly when to create packages or gems, and also when to. And this was the biggest shift that I participated in, was knowing what is not worth testing.
Interesting.
You can
Test
get
all the
kind of
things.
crazy. Yeah, you can get crazy with integration testing. And, it can be an exercise where you're simply I think of a question that I want to ask, does the API do that? And I write a test. But the problem is that test has to live on and be maintained. And so there are questions that might have some value, but the maintenance to keep them over time negates their value to the risks.
Interesting.
Yeah. And so we've had to all kind of shift and learn about how to properly judge that. And that's been probably one of the more interesting parts of my job recently. But overall, QA or QE role can be heavily programming for the automation part.
Right.
So now all of our tests are run in a variety of environments in an automated way in Circle CI, and you write them such that you try to keep the setup simple. So it's fully automated, and we work closely with DevOps. As a separate thing, I wouldn't take a QA job that wasn't fully automated.
Yeah.
That was mostly manual. I wouldn't take that. So.
Not even to build the automation?
To build the automation, yes, and that's what I was doing.
Right.
That's been a mainstay of my job. But if there are some traps in QA roles that you can be really pigeonholed in a QA role, and that would be at a company that doesn't view you as a form of a developer, that kind of views you as you're a manual tester Your job is to know the data and know the code enough that you can talk about it, but you're not a coder. And I would say I wouldn't recommend taking those kinds of jobs.
Yeah, I agree. Tyler, you mentioned in your introduction that you were doing about like 90% sales, 10% development. How much coding? Like, so you've transitioned. I think you're on your third job now since you graduated. How much coding do you do on a regular basis now? Because you've been graduated like 3 years or so. How much coding do you do now?
So for the current role, I'm on a ramp up, so I'm coding pretty much every day. And basically, I think one of the interesting things about the sales engineer job is that you really have to be a subject matter expert on the product from a user's perspective. So you have to build any integration that the product does. You have to fully understand the way that the product works and the way that the end user is gonna interact with it. And so that means like the onboarding process for any particular stack is pretty intensive, and it's pretty drawn out over time. I expect that to transition probably back to around like the 25% to 75%. And really where that 25% comes from is like building proof of concepts and demos to show specific feature sets to the customer.
Right. As part of the sales engineering, there's sometimes like pre-sales engineering, and then like kind of like immediately after they sign up and pay you a bunch of money, you're like giving them like some really dedicated like one-on-one support, especially for like enterprise level customers. How much of that is like, let me get you actually up to speed, like let me write you some dedicated sample code versus like, here's just a generic proof of concept that we can send out to everybody?
Yeah. So that I'd say that's really dependent upon a number of things. The very first thing is like how the company has pre and post sales divided. The current company that I'm at is very much pre-sales just do pre-sales, and post-sales do all the implementation. Okay. And that allows people really to specialize. The previous two jobs I've had to this, both pre-sales and post-sales were kind of intermingled. I think one of the benefits of that intermingling is that in that demo process, you can really kind of build something that they can take forward with them into the integration stage. The demo process, I think, in a purely pre-sales environment is more around like the specific business value that they're going to get from the platform or the service. And so that's what you're really trying to elevate, because like, I mean, if we're 100% honest, right? Like people's problems are not unique, right? And that's why they're looking for a specific piece of software or something, right? It's because they're experiencing this pain point and need a way to overcome it, right? And so we go into it with certain plays where we understand where they're going to be coming from, and we need to really use the demo that's going to show them that how we can alleviate the pain product. And the way that I've come to like really understand my job is that like we're kind of an external product evangelist, right? Like our goal is to really show you how you can transform your business by using our software, and I feel like that does become pretty rewarding, because you get to see like how far people can go with their businesses. I mean, it's important to have, of course, good software, right?
Sure, that helps.
It's not good software. Like they're not going anywhere.
Pay us a bunch of money, by the way. Our stuff is crap.
Yeah. But the way
tougher
that
sell on that one.
But the way that I kind of like tell people how their role is it like if you go into a car dealership, right? Like the car dealer is just going to hand over the keys once you make the sale, right? And there's no like hand holding from a technical perspective, either before the purchase or after the purchase, like how to use that vehicle, right? So like a sales engineer would come in and be like, hey, this is the way you turn on the headlights in this absurdly, ridiculously complex vehicle, or this is how you would use the self-driving feature. And they would kind of like guide you around, right?
Yeah, that's great.
Can I just say, listening to Tyler makes me want to buy his software, even though I don't know what it is.
Well, it's pretty great, and the new software.
Yeah.
I was gonna say we could all like just form a company right here, with everybody. We got sales, we got quality, we got DevOps and product, we got data. Speaking of data, Jake, we had a question in chat that kind of be up your alley here. So G Realish 077 first time chat. Welcome to the stream, by the way. Asks, are data structures and algorithms important for a data analyst type of role? So the kind of work that you do, how much like regular sort of data structure and like algorithmic thinking goes into your job?
So yes and no. The thing about kind of data analytics, it's really three roles. Is there's a data analyst role, a data engineering role, and a data science role. The data analyst can kind of fit anything, would hire people from a variety of kind of backgrounds. So it might be someone that just knows the business really well because you're kind of analyzing processes and how things can improve. And that's kind of maybe you're a financial analyst and someone has a ton of like finance information or sales information. Because we end up working with a bunch of different aspects of the company for that, and sometimes just having that knowledge and being able to then kind of take that and compact the information for how it works is important. But the data science gets kind of more into that. I know there's like some data science programs and they feature more on things like clustering algorithms and things like that you can pull like statistics from. There's the scikit-learn library in Python that kind of will do a lot of that for you, or like ArcGIS stuff kind of does things. But we also run custom like greedy clustering algorithms to find clusters of I work at Comcast and we do specific, where do we want to build fiber? And so we want to find clusters of buildings. So we'll do like a custom greedy cluster algorithm, connect it to how our network is actually built and things like that. We'll do, I can't think at the moment. There's a few other kind of like custom algorithms for like how we kind of build things. So to that degree, it becomes important and more of a data science one, but sometimes it's more of the statistics based part of that. Data engineering is where you more get into the data structure thing, things like building a data warehouse so that different aspects of your company can access all of the things in a way that makes sense or connect all of that. And quickly. Because I daily pull from at least 8 different servers of different kinds of servers, and whether that's Python, Oracle, APIs, AWS, and they don't like to join nicely in any way, shape, or form. And if you ever work with certain kinds of data, addresses are a particular pain, and they are in no way standardized or helpful at any level. So just how you interpret an address is an interesting like code analysis itself. So the short answer is you can get into a data analyst role with no knowledge of data structures or algorithms. A lot of people in the roles don't really know programming at all. Maybe they know like some SQL becomes important and data visualization is important, but you don't need to know that. But to get into some of the more complex stuff, it becomes really helpful. So you can get into it without it, but it helps.
I would say in data type of roles, there may be specific algorithms and like specific ways of thinking about the data, but it won't necessarily be like, oh, go memorize like a depth first search kind of algorithm and go memorize, what a red-black tree is. Like, you're not going to have to memorize those kinds of things typically for those kinds of interviews. They are going to have very specific ways of thinking about their data, usually in like a forest kind of analogy would be some things to look into there.
I finally remembered the other thing I was thinking of is we have people that need to go out and go to different buildings, and it became a basic traveling salesman program. So a lot of the kind of very things you would learn at the basic level kind of solve a lot of the problems.
Great. Next up, we got a question for Alyssa from chat. Says, since you have experience in a startup, what are some of your lessons learned for that role in a startup?
So I think, even the business that I work in now, Central, the contracting company, is very small. There's 9 of us. So I feel like my experience working at a startup in a different industry has served me well today in my current role. I think it's important to wear a lot of hats and look for ways that you can add value outside of your specific role.
That's good.
So, like, I think that we can think about what we want for our future, especially, since we're a consultancy, I can think about what I want for my future from my client perspective, but I can also think about it from my, my employer perspective. And so, yeah, I think you, just like look around for things to do and ask good questions about the business, because they may not have thought about those things when you're working in a small company.
For sure. The one phrase I learned to completely get out of my vocabulary working at startups, and most of my career's been at startups, is the phrase, "That's not my job." That doesn't exist in startup land. In startup land, you wear a ton of hats, and like everything is everybody's job, especially when the company's really small. They just need people that can see that something needs to get done, and you try your best to solve it and like bring other people in if you start running into trouble. But they want to see that you can take the initiative to find problem. Well, like not necessarily like, oh, I'm just gonna spend my day just looking for bugs in the code, but like if you find a bug, you're gonna try to fix that bug. If you find a problem with a coffee pot, you're gonna go clean the coffee pot. Like whatever it needs to kind of keep that startup going day to day. Yeah.
Yep. The people are the business, and so yeah, sure. It's good to find problems and solve them.
Yeah. On a contrast side of that, so Norm, you're at Aetna, like enormous company. How many employees would you say are at Aetna? Like thousands? Like many, many thousands?
Aetna was bought out by CVS a few
Oh, that's
years
right.
ago.
Yeah.
And so we are a Fortune 4 company.
Wow.
We are the 4th largest company in the United States.
That's big.
I think it's to the tune of 500,000 employees.
Wow. Dang. What would you say some of the main differences are working at a like really massive company, as far as like the kind of support you get from your team and the kinds of responsibilities for your team? Like at a startup, like everybody works on everything, but in a company that size, whichever sort of piece of the product you're working on, you might be like maybe a little more narrow focused on that kind of thing. What kind of general support do you feel like from other teams and like upper levels of management and so
on? So the part of the app that we work on is just the provider search part. So if you go to the Aetna website or the phone app and you're looking for a doctor, the moment you start searching for a doctor, then now you're in our APIs and our app, our part of the app.
Cool.
So it's segmented in such a way that it can be done by a small set of teams. And so in that respect, we're almost startup-like in that if it's in our field, we kind of get some room to do what we want. But other things are definitely part of the bureaucracy. So for example, we recently had a change in our security policies that has implemented. Now we have 4 different security scans for all of our software before it goes to prod. Mm-hmm. And we don't have access to, how those scans work. That's a totally different division. We only have to deal with the consequences of those. So it's a real mixed bag. And sometimes it can be frustrating. I'm working on rewriting an API right now that makes a call to a subservice API that we don't even know what team owns it.
Wow.
No idea. And we've been working on it for a month and a half now. We haven't gotten a straight answer.
So if you find a problem, like who deals with it?
Well, that's a good question.
That's half the job right there, is tracking down who actually owns any given data source.
I suppose, yeah.
So I basically have to treat it as a black box. Like, okay, that's interesting. It did that. Okay.
Let's not do that again.
Yeah.
Wow. That's pretty wild. Norm, while we got you, Zooey222 asked in chat, what can a new software developer do to get into a QA type of role? Like, what would you say are some good characteristics? And I think Zooey wasn't on the chat earlier when you were kind of introducing yourself. So maybe kind of go back over like some of the, personality traits, but like what are some of the sort of the harder technical skills that someone wanting to get into a quality role could take on?
Yeah. There's a book called The Art of Software Testing that is really helpful. and it talks about basically understanding a logic tree of how to test. So you can write a test that tests the cover that will raise your coverage, but it won't actually test all of the different logical decisions that are made in a line of code. That seems to be only a human can figure that out for some reason. So you have to actually look at, I get a notepad out and I like create little logic trees of what I'm seeing and make sure to test all of those. So if that's the kind of thing that sounds interesting to you, that you're not necessarily just constantly creating new things, but if you like the idea of, okay, let's slow down and break down exactly what the software is doing and see what potentially could go wrong, just in general, that is a sign that you're more going to lean toward a quality position. But again, I do want to emphasize that there are pitfalls in QA jobs, and there are probably some QA jobs that if you have a training in software development, you shouldn't take. Maybe nobody should take some of those jobs. I'm not sure. So,
Norm, what was the name of that book again?
The Art of Software Testing.
Thanks. The author is Glenford Myers, and they're up to a 3rd edition.
Really helpful.
Cool.
Kevin Ganesh asks in chat, is Android developer a good career? Anybody want to take that? Anybody know anything about mobile development?
I have a friend at Qualcomm that works on the hardware part of it. I have no idea about the, and he's been there a good decade and really enjoys it, but that's kind of more developing hardware that runs Android. But I have never done mobile development.
I know a few QEs who transitioned to Android development at Aetna, and they love it. They're working in Kotlin. They tell me that Kotlin is a really great improvement over straight Java, and they have access to neat tools and libraries. So, I mean, just in general, it seems like a sorely needed and really interesting direction to go.
Yeah, I think it depends a lot on where you want to take your career. If mobile development is something you want to explore, I would say start tinkering with it on the side. So JetBrains, the company that makes all these really great IDEs, they actually kind of invented the Kotlin language. It wasn't initially meant to be a mobile development language, but it was quickly picked up by Google as far as hey, we want to replace Java with this thing. And so Google started marketing the heck out of it, and it really took off from there. So Kotlin is kind of like the new modern standard for Android development, similar to how Swift kind of took over Objective-C for iOS development. But Kotlin's actually a pretty nice language. I haven't done a ton of it myself. I've watched other people code in it. It's very much like Python. Think of Python with stronger typing, typed variables than Python, just very loosely typed. But it's an interesting language, and it's not that difficult to understand kind of the core concepts of the language. It's more the concept of understanding a little bit like an MVC architecture of where do I build my views, how does that plug into controller logic, how do I fetch data from something akin to a model, but really you're probably just making API calls, to a backend service to send and receive data. You're not really storing. You might store a little bit of localized data, but most stuff in mobile apps is coming from some backend server somewhere anyway. $753 for that book? Are you serious?
Stop it.
What book?
No. Yeah, I found a link to that book on Amazon, and you can buy it new for $753.91. Norm will sell you his copy for $752.91.
Something's gone wrong there.
Yeah, something's definitely wrong. Sorry to put an Amazon link in there that was going to cost you a kidney. It's not generally my MO. That's for the 3rd edition. Maybe by the 2nd edition, maybe it'll be half that price. I don't know.
That's got to be a glitch with Amazon's pricing algorithm. Sometimes
Maybe.
It runs up stuff because the paperback is only 1 to
Oh yeah, it was
200.
Get a third-party
Yeah.
seller there.
So can we just acknowledge that Amazon's software on the book on software testing might
Right.
not work?
Yeah,
Yeah.
maybe.
Need
It's,
some testing.
Tyler, maybe you can introduce Norm to some folks over at Amazon and get him to help fix that problem for him.
Yeah, $199. That can't be right.
Wow.
Yeah, and then we'll get Jake. So Ned Fraser says in chat, then we'll get Jake to help with the data side of it as well. And yeah, I'm telling you, the five of us, we could just start a business right here, right now. We got all our bases covered, I think. So, too funny.
That's crazy.
$750 for a book. Wow. All right.
Textbook. That's the price of college textbooks.
I know, right?
Yeah.
Which is ridiculous because in college you'd use it like twice, and then like you can't resell it anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sui says, I guess it's ramen for the next couple of months to go buy the book. For sure. Yeah. Good times. So Ned Fraser also says in chat, I started as a manual tester and moved into automation. It was a hard transition. Let's, speaking of transitions, let's talk a little bit about like how you kind of have pivoted into different kinds of roles. So Alyssa, you talked us through a little bit of how you went from the DevOps role into the product role. Tyler, can you talk a little bit about sort of your transition? Like you've pretty much always stayed in sales engineering, is that right? But how has that role sort of evolved like just over the last 3 years? Is it still kind of the same, or are you doing anything drastically different than you did like 3 years ago?
No, I mean it's pretty much the same. The only real difference is at that new company that I'm at, the segregation really between pre and post sales.
Okay.
You know, we're trying to take a much more, I think, regimented approach in the way that we're selling. And so that's really the biggest thing that has changed. So in kind of coordination with that, like my job has shifted more towards like demo POC buildings, being on through the initial sales process much earlier. And then, what was the other thing? Oh, and then much more hands-on in terms of like actually walking through the demo myself.
Okay.
Like at the previous companies, we would build a demo and then really hand that off to the salesperson.
Mm-hmm. When I did developer relations work at Stream before I went to teach at Turing, the DevRel, it was kind of like DevRel / sales engineering / everything. I was doing like internal IT, like, hey, can you go fix the printer again? And if you got time this afternoon, can you run to Costco and like stock up our snack bar? Like it literally, I counted like 15 different roles when I left that place. And I'm like, cool, now I get to teach, I get to do one thing. And that was fabulous. But yeah, you end up doing a lot of stuff there for sure. Norm, how has your stuff kind of transitioned over time, like from how you started into kind of the role, because you're like managing a team now? How did you, well, let's talk about like just the transition of, you know, do you like in tech, we kind of reached this pivotal point of like, hey, you should like start managing a team now instead of like doing it yourself. What was that transition like? And then what's it like actually now managing a team and like making sure like everybody's got work to do and so on?
Well, I'm a tech lead, so I wouldn't say I manage a team. It's kind of loose. I guide new QE developers and help to train them and onboard them, and kind of also try to help them with their career at Aetna. But they don't they don't report to me or anything like that. So just to be clear, yeah, I'm not in a management per se role.
Okay.
But as far as how my job expanded, I think it reminds me of something that Alyssa said, that I just kind of took on more than I was asked, because I saw areas where I could add value.
Right.
So one of the biggest things at Aetna in our division, one of the biggest points of data that is important for quality is a concept called PAR, which is whether your doctor is participating in your network.
Okay.
And the business logic behind that is a little subtle, and understanding how the business views it and the rules, and also how the data shows up is something that I didn't see a lot of developers or QEs looking deeply into. Mm-hmm. So I just thought, well, okay, isn't that the most important part of the data, is as far as if I go find a doctor,
Are they a
and
network
they're
or out of
not
network?
they're actually not in my network, and I go see them, that can cost me money.
Yeah, for sure.
And so I started like reaching out to people in the business and also on the data side, because the big company, right, we don't produce our own data. That's a whole separate data team.
Mhm.
So just setting up meetings with them. Nobody asked me to do this, and I just learned about everything about it, and then that became valuable as time went on, and that helped me to kind of grow my role. Um, and yeah, that helped me be I guess, whatever kind of leadership you want to call it, tech lead.
Okay.
That helped me in that, and then also helped me. Now I'm just doing straight software development, where I take any ticket. It's not limited to testing, and I'm
That's cool.
training new QEs to do the same thing. So basically, we're now transitioning to being just straight software developers with a slightly different angle on things. Other than
Oh,
that,
interesting. Okay.
95% identical jobs. And that
Very cool.
has been through my kind of coaching and advocating for that transition as well.
That's
So,
cool. Yeah, and that's an important thing in tech too. You got to advocate for yourself because no one else is going to do it necessarily. But it's interesting, the mindset of like, do the job to get the job. Like, just find a pain point, go work on that pain point, and then, hey, look, there's a job to go fix that pain point now.
exactly.
It can definitely help win them over for sure. There are, and we were kind of talking about this, I think before we even went live on the stream, we were talking about this post I saw on LinkedIn where someone went and got a job where they didn't have the level of tech skill, and the company's like, that's fine, we'll train you on it. Like, you seem like a good person to have on the team, and that tends to be a little more rare. Although I wish it were more commonplace for companies to take a chance on entry-level devs of like, hey, you don't have the skill, but that's fine, we're going to train you anyway. Where in Norm's position, like Norm actively sought out something that was interesting to him, kind of ignited that passion a little bit, started working in that, and then that turned into a role. So now in a bigger company, I would say that's probably more likely to happen, where if you're in a small startup like Alyssa, where it's like, hey, I found this one little thing and I'm kind of interested in that as a role. It's like, yeah, you can do that too on top of everything else that you're also doing. But it's not like that's going to now become the only thing you do, because like we said, in startup land, like everything is everybody's job for sure. Yeah.
It is interesting hearing this though. There's so much overlap between our positions of just listening to everyone else hear this. Like, you could swap me for a QA position and there's going to be a slight difference in what we do, but a lot of it is very similar in a lot of ways.
Yeah. So Jake, you talked a little bit about like when you first started out in this role, it was a lot of like web framework and like sort of transposing everything from one language into another. What is your day-to-day like nowadays? Like, are you still doing that similar sort of work, or are you just focusing more on the data side and the warehousing and stuff?
I got banned pretty quickly from new app development because anything developed in Python would have to be converted to C# again.
Okay.
But more just kind of the framework is you build it in SQL, Python, and display it in Tableau, and Tableau acts as kind of like your web app thing for like a data area stuff. But it's weird because it somewhat depends on what's going on at the moment. So like we switched from a SQL server to a Teradata server. So hundreds of very long SQL scripts all had to be converted from SQL to Teradata, or from MS SQL to Teradata, and that was a very, very long project of just kind of data engineering, manipulating kind of back-end tables. And this new infrastructure bill just passed with $64 billion in rural broadband spending. My team got the first crack at how do we bid on that. So
that's cool.
I think it was February, we were given like, we need to bid on these projects in 2 months. We have never bid, Comcast as a company had never bid on rural broadband projects. What can we need like a month of prep time once we identify them. Can you identify just like, there's a bunch of rural broadband money, identify projects we want to bid on, you have a month kind of thing.
Wow.
So that what we work on varies a lot based on kind of business need and where we're kind of focused. So sometimes we're working with sales, sometimes it's marketing, sometimes it's construction, sometimes it's business development. So it's a lot of kind of SQL and a lot of kind of pulling data sources together and then trying to tell like a story from that, and a lot of kind of automation of that once it's built. So once you spent all that time pulling the data sources together, can you automate it in a way where you can display it to both higher up people that get like an overview and people kind of down in the trenches working on it where they can see their individual thing and kind of build a workflow off of it, and then just random whatever happens to be going wrong in questions at a time. But it's never the same kind of project.
Yeah. That overlap is interesting. Like, you know, let me take these different things from different groups of people and kind of play like almost liaison or translator between like business units of the company to be able to discuss all that stuff.
And just being a big company, there's so many different teams that half the time we're doing things, we're leveraging other teams to do them and trying to make connections between all the 5 different teams all working on similar projects.
Right.
So that's just part of it.
Cool. Austin X Duong in chat says, I thrive on entrepreneurial spirit. Yeah, you definitely need that in startup land for sure. Like everything is everybody's job and everybody kind of owns the business. But I think the larger the business gets, I think the more sort of isolated you can feel in your work. Tyler, what's the company size where you're at now?
So the company size that I'm at now is 130. The first company that I was at was 100.
And the one in between was a big FANG company. So lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of people.
Yeah.
Also probably in the Fortune 4 group that Norm is in.
Mm-hmm. But I would say to your point, like I don't think it matters what size the company is, that kind of like sense of ownership, right? Like see something that needs to be done and do it.
Yeah.
Right. That's going to be rewarded across the board. Yeah. You know, and it's just going to show you as a motivated individual who takes charge.
For sure. And that goes a long, long way. And document that stuff. Like keep track of that in your own notebook, not just the notebook you keep for work like Norm does. Like keep all that stuff in a separate notebook of like, I did this, I did this, I did this, I did this. So when it's time to go ask for that raise, you got documentation. Be like, look at all the things I did. This is why I want more money. It makes a big, big difference. Like being able to walk into the company and say, like, I took initiative to go find the answer to this problem. I fixed it. This is what it saved the business, or how it helped, you know, a team kind of overcome something. That's the kind of stuff you have to advocate for yourself, because no one else is going to do it for you. Like, oh, hey, Norm, remember that thing you did? You're like, no. But if Norm's been writing all that stuff down, like when I worked at SendGrid, for example, I was trying to apply for a role, and they actually had this internal application where you had to like build a resume, like go apply for the job. And I'm like, I got to build a resume? I've been working here for years. Like everybody knows me. And they're like, no, you got to like build a resume and you have to actually like go interview for this internal role. And I'm like, all right. So I put a resume together and actually kept a copy of it. And I pulled it up recently because I was looking for different samples of resume layouts and whatever. And I was looking back over this resume going, I don't remember half of this stuff that I built while I was there. And it's kind of interesting to kind of reflect back of like, oh yeah, I actually did quite a lot. I mean, I was there for 4 years. I was involved in a lot of projects. But like, I only remember like maybe 4 of them, you know, in you know, the whole span of that time. But now looking back at that resume is like, oh yeah, I did work on that multi-factor authentication, you know, between all these subsystems. Like I totally had forgotten about that. I don't mention that to anybody because it slipped my mind. So yeah, definitely keep track of those things as you're building it out. Like keep track of the projects you're on, keep track of how you involved yourself in that thing, or problems that you found and how you fixed them. Like somebody's got to track that stuff. It should be you. So
well, and to your point about like keeping track of that, I also feel like when you bring that information to future interviews, those are the questions that you're going to answer with the most impact,
sure.
right?
Yeah.
Because they're concrete examples where you've delivered value.
Yep. Right. And so practicing those behavioral questions. Tell me about a time when. It's like, I got a whole book of this stuff now. Let me pull up my book and like practice answers to these things. Yeah, for sure. Cool. So yeah, as always, happy to take more questions from chat. Otherwise, we could probably start to wrap up in the next 10, 15 minutes or so. Appreciate everybody's time for sure. What other thoughts do you got on your mind, folks? What else do you want to tell us about?
I do want to say I made
ahead.
a mistake. It's not 500,000 employees. I'm testing myself.
No, no worries.
Only 300,000 employees.
Oh, only up.
Oh
All
my
right. Never mind then.
Yeah.
Practically a startup, Norm. Come on. Too funny. I've certainly been at companies that were like 300 people and they're like, oh yeah, we're a startup. I'm like, not at 300 people, you're not a startup anymore.
No,
Come on.
not a startup anymore.
You kind of shed that name after about 100 people, but
Yeah.
300,000 is still a pretty significant quantity of employees for sure. Now, as part of CVS, though, that's going to include like everybody that works at CVS, like people that actually work in the commercial spaces and so on, right? Yeah. Zooey says everybody does double the work, so it feels like 500,000 maybe.
There you go. Good point.
Good times, good times.
I wanted to learn more about sales engineering. Like I'm not sure I have a good concept of the coding part of the job. Like, are you coding for demos, like as in program that automates how the demo runs, or I don't know if we can do that, but I was interested in learning a little bit more about that.
Yeah, let's dive in.
Yeah. So let's take the first company that I worked at. It was called FastSpring, and it was basically like a payments platform, right? And so on the client side, we offered a JavaScript library that would allow you to interact with basically a programmatic representation of a storefront, right? And so we presented like buy buttons and decorated pricing and everything that you could utilize on the client side of your application. On the back end, then we had an exposed API where you could continue to purchase orders through, or collect webhooks based upon those events that have happened in the purchase cycle. Really, it was focused on like SaaS too. So the demos that I would build there would be like a mock e-commerce application, SaaS-based application, where a user makes a purchase, completes the purchase, the web application consumes the webhook, and then you entitle that purchase basically through that demo mock application, right? And I would build a separate one for each, just because I'm not a great front-end dev, and so like styling isn't really my strong suit. So I would just do it for each individual client, and then they could kind of take that bit of code with them through the integration process and like look at how I consume a certain webhook or something like that. The second company, Amazon Pay, was more API driven. The client side representation of that offering was really like a button render that was kind of forced upon the client by Amazon, because of course they want to control their branding. But then the rest of it was strictly like back-end REST APIs. This third company that I'm at now is Apollo GraphQL. And so we have both like an open source offering, a lot of open source offering, and a lot of open source tooling. And then, for the enterprise space, what we're really trying to get into is more of like SaaS-based analytics. And I would kind of like look at maybe Bitly as kind of a business model where, a lot of the important tooling is open source, and what you're really paying for is like the analytics and the opportunity to make better and more informed business decisions based upon how your applications are working, right? So like the demos that we build there are really implementations of a graph that can provide data that has essentially mock traffic to it for this studio offering, that we can show how you can manipulate the actual SaaS platform. And to some of your points, like there's really heavy stuff on like who owns different APIs in there, so you can actually look up, like for both of your guys' situations, you can look up who owns that piece of the graph, right? And then you can go talk to them. But yeah, it's really just like bringing that stuff up based upon how that client is going to interact with whatever that software is.
Interesting. Sounds like the kinds of simulations that front-end testers at Aetna run. They'll write simulations that engage in these kind of scenarios.
When I worked at Stream the first time, I was doing kind of this pre-sales engineering, and it was like Tyler. It was doing a lot of proof of concept style work of like, hey, we got this customer on the phone, we really want to win their business, so Ian's going to write you like this custom little script just to kind of get you up and running on like what our product does and show you how to do the API calls. And so it was a lot of like custom writing, like 100 to 200 line, script in whatever language they wanted, and just sending that over. And eventually it got to the point where they were all kind of pre-canned and ready to go. I just had to go in and manipulate a couple of things, like what they wanted to call a particular news feed or what API key to use, blah, blah, blah. And so the turnaround became much faster. And it got to a point where I actually suggested to the company, like, you know what, we should just make a self-serve option on the website for people that want to try the product of pick your language and tell us what you want to call these things, and we'll just have like almost meta programming of have the software write the software, and then you download, and that is your customized version. Already has your API key embedded. It has all the stuff that you need just to get up and running really quick, and you can run that right away. So yeah, I mean, there could be some automation stuff in there as well, but in my experience, it was a lot of proof of concept and then following up. Like once they actually got launched, I was kind of, because I was part of the sales process and part of that custom script, I was often the first sort of like person that they would contact if they had trouble, and then I would kind of like shift them off to customer service or customer support after that if there were like ongoing kinds of things. But usually for the big enterprise deals, the sales engineering team, which was like me and like one other guy, we tended to cover a lot of the technology side of it, like getting people up and running. So, but again, like DevOps, like we talked about with Alyssa, like DevOps means a lot of things to a lot of companies. Same thing with sales engineering. Like your amount of involvement is going to vary a lot.
Yeah. Cool.
Yep. And it, like, to be fair, like I would say it's a pretty fun job. The one, I think, caveat that I would add is that I probably wouldn't, like looking back at my own history, I probably would not take it as the first job, because it's like, it's pretty lucrative. And then like to go back to actual dev work, I would have to go all the way back to a junior dev, because I don't have, experience in a production code base or anything like that. But that's not to say that there's not paths forward for me. Like there's
Right.
a lot of paths forward. And like, especially like I feel like one of the strong suits of a sales engineer is really that concept of user empathy. Like I understand
Sure.
fully how users want to use the product.
Yeah.
Right? Like that is my day-to-day job to understand. And so like moving into product or something like that is fairly easy.
Product people seem. I'd like to hear what you guys think, but as
And
far
not
as
guys.
I go, product people get paid more than developers.
Is that true, Alyssa?
I don't know why. Not that it's the scale of their job at all. Their
Yeah.
job, obviously, I think.
I think with
I don't know why it's-
I think
Why
with
is it-
product roles though, you have to understand like your market position of like where does your company belong in the overall scheme of like what's the market for this particular kind of software, this particular kind of tool, like how big is that market, and what slice of it can we possibly get, and how do we need to sort of shift our focus to like grab more of that market, like Jake was saying, like $60-odd billion of rural infrastructure, like that's a pretty massive market. How do we carve out a piece of that? Well, we have to know our product inside and out, but we also have to know how's that going to fit. And so I imagine there are a lot of product folks at Comcast now scrambling to try to figure out how do we get involved in those kinds of contracts to win, some of that $60 billion, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, the amount of effort some of those projects take is massive, and like I say that my team got like first crack at that, but there's so many different teams involved across like the company, and that includes different engineering teams, that includes sales teams, that includes marketing and going out and doing that, and just like design work. There's a lot that goes into any of it, that it's not that it kind of fits into any one team, but different teams working on all the different parts of it that is impossible to keep track of.
Austin asked in chat, I think this would be a good one to kind of like go around the room per se. Says, was your first job in tech, was it a cold application online or was it through networking? Curious about everybody's journey. So let's go like Jake, Tyler, Alyssa, Norm. So was it like cold application interview process, or was it referral, like network based?
Mine have always been cold applications. I've somehow I never get hired through the networking stuff, and it's the cold applications that paid off for me.
Maybe you need better friends, Jake. I don't know. Tyler, what was your experience for your jobs?
I'm completely the opposite. All three of mine have been strictly through networking.
Alyssa, what's your experience been?
Mine was through a meetup, so networking in person. Not what did you call it earlier? Not just show up, but meet.
It's a meetup, not a show up. Yeah.
Yeah. So mine was networking.
Okay. Norm?
Mine was kind of a combination of both.
Right.
I did some networking on my own and with Turing, but also there was a job that I applied to, and so that's it led to the whole cycle.
Yeah. And as part of that reference check of like, hey, do you have any developers? They actually mentioned your name, which kind of, helped out too. So yeah, it can be a mix. We've had people on the stream, like I'm thinking of Jen. Jen Develops. Had her on the show a month and a half ago, where she was sending out like hundreds of cold applications and got 0 hits, like completely ghosted. Kind of like Alyssa was saying, like you applied for 200 jobs and like you got like 30 responses out of all of them. So like really, really small ratio of like even getting a call back. But other people like Jake has done fine with the cold applications. You apply for a job and you got an interview, and that interview got you a job. So everyone's a little bit different as far as the experience and what you bring and sort of how you're presenting yourself in that. Jake, how many applications would you say you actually sent out before you actually got like an interview and from there like got the job? Like what would you say those ratios were? If you had to guess, like just ballpark it.
I think I was probably putting in like 30 applications per interview, and I went to quite a few interviews before. I probably had a good like 30, 40 like first interviews, and I went through like some multiple like 3-part interviews before it fell apart at the last couple of people, or just the position got removed or something. So yeah, it was hundreds in total, I think.
If you all had to go back and give yourself a piece of advice on the job application interview side of things, and like, that first job offer, what kind of advice would you give yourself around like the application, like how to interview? If you could go back and pick out a couple of nuggets of wisdom there, what would you share?
I'll go first, I guess. Mine kind of comes from that kind of sales aspect, but like everything that I'm interested in now when I'm talking to people is like, how did you actually deliver value, right? Like, why is that important and why should I care? So when you're writing your bullet points for your resume, that's what you need to express. Like, yes, sure, you did something, but why? Why did it matter? That would be the biggest advice I would give to myself. I think that can make a really more impactful first read on a resume.
Awesome.
I would say job applications are the most soul draining thing or one of the most soul draining thing I've ever had to do, and it's hard doing like day after day of applying and never hearing back on anything. But yeah, like it was just said that you putting in the effort to do a quality application is probably worth way more than just like throwing up resumes on specific sites. Is gearing it toward what value you can bring to that company, even if it's just like a short cover letter or something, makes a huge difference in sorting through all of that. But actually getting up the effort to bother to write a custom thing on every application you're probably never going to hear back from is heart-wrenching.
Yeah, for sure. It does take time, and the more you do it, the faster you get at it. But yeah, it's still an investment in time, where if you're going to get ghosted that much, it does feel like wasted time. But on the off chance that someone's going to read it, it can make a big difference for sure. Zooey says in chat, I feel Jake's pain right now. So Zooey graduated at a boot camp, and I've been helping them out. I did a resume review for them recently. And it's a tough go in the tech industry right now. If you have 0 experience, it's a really tough go.
Yeah.
First job is always the hardest, right? Like,
it is. Yeah.
I recently was on the job market because there were some things that I didn't like about my job. Since then, I'm not anymore. I had a good talk with my boss. But for about a month and a half, 2 months, I was on the job market. And I got to say, the second job didn't seem like it was easier than the first job to get. I got ghosted at every stage. I got some crazy tech challenges that I wasn't prepared for.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think once you get past maybe 3 or 4 years in the industry, then maybe it starts to get easier. That's my theory.
I got 25 years experience, and it can still be tough. It can, you can still get ghosted. You can still get like a recruiter calling you up, say, "Hey, you want to talk about this job?" And you're like, "Sure," and then you never hear back from them again. It's like, all right. So, yeah. Alyssa, what would your advice be to your former self, or in the modern market, to folks trying to get into tech?
Yeah, I think one thing I would want to remind myself is don't sort of self-select. Don't tell yourself, "Oh no, I couldn't do that." Like, put the application in and let them tell you no.
Yeah.
So I think it's really important to, not just think, "Oh, I couldn't do that. That's not for me." You never know. And then I also think it's really important to stay up during that process. Like, you need to find ways so that when you go in and you're meeting someone new, you have that smile on your face and you're being positive. So like, whatever it takes. For me, it was lifting weights and like getting under heavy things, like, meant a lot to me. So I think you have to find ways to like stay up.
Yeah, that's great.
Great advice. As far as me, I would say the biggest thing for me would be I would have had more empathy for other devs that are in the industry that I'm trying to get into already. I came in with a set of passions of what I wanted to do, and that helped me get the job. But then once I got into the job, I think I kind of got a reputation of not listening to the more senior devs and kind of imposing what I wanted too much. So that ended up hurting me in my position, and that I would say I would redo that.
Yeah.
Having a little bit more empathy for the people in the jobs that you're trying to work with.
Yeah. All good tips. All right, I think we'll close out with some silly questions, like I like to do with my guests, and really appreciate all your time. So Jake, Tyler, Norm, Alyssa, thank you so much. It's always refreshing to get to talk to old friends, but also just to help other people like realize like, hey, there's more than just software development. It's a full-time coding kind of job, and tell us a little bit about what that role was and what that interview process was like. So deeply appreciate that. Cool. Well, let's. So these questions are meant to be rapid fire. Don't think too hard about it. Some of them are just yes/no questions. Some of them get really ridiculous. And so I'm just going to call on you, and I'm going to ask a ridiculous question, and we'll get an answer. So if you take more than 5 seconds to think of an answer, you're doing it wrong. So Jake, is cereal soup?
Yes.
Yeah.
100% yes.
All right, Tyler, what secret conspiracy would you like to start?
I have no idea.
All right.
Secret conspiracy? No idea.
No? All right, then what's invisible but you wish people could see?
I don't know.
Electricity.
I mean, what is even invisible?
All right, we'll move on. Norm, is a hot dog a sandwich?
No.
No? Alyssa, what's the best Wi-Fi name that you've seen?
I don't know. Pigs can fly.
All right. Tyler, back to you. What's the most ridiculous fact that you know?
Ooh.
I can't think of anything offhand.
Do you know there's enough room between the Earth and the Moon to fit all the other planets in the solar system, including Pluto?
I did not know that.
Now you know. Jake, in 40 years, what do you think people will be nostalgic about?
Not having cell phones.
Not having cell phones, yeah. Norm, what part of a kid's movie completely scarred you?
I want to say it was some car that died, but I'm not remembering what movie it's in.
The Willy Wonka, where they're going in the tunnel with all the psychedelic. That one freaked me out.
Might have been.
Yeah. Alyssa, if animals could talk, which one would be the rudest?
A rhino.
Rhino? All right.
Mm-hmm.
Jake, in one sentence, how would you sum up the internet?
Everything. That's all I got. One word. Everything.
All right. Tyler, how many chickens would it take to take down an elephant?
I'd say 100.
100?
Round 100, yeah.
Zooey says the horse in Neverending Story was what scarred him. Interesting note on that. They actually had a making of Neverending Story thing that we actually took our kids to, except they showed the making of before the movie. But one of the things in the making of was they actually had to show how the horse was like sinking in the quicksand, and how they had to train the horse not to freak out. And like how like it took months and months of preparation of like gradually making it deeper and deeper to where when it actually got up like all the way up to like up the neck and up to the face of the horse is like, yeah, okay, just another Tuesday. Like no big deal, but it took like months and months of training of this horse like completely freaking out. So yeah. Let's see. Alyssa, what used to be considered trashy but is now very classy? Day drinking.
Yeah, there you go.
Norm, what's the weirdest thing a guest has done at your house?
Argued with their husband.
Ooh, all right. Fair. Tyler, what's the weirdest thing you've done in someone's house?
I don't know.
All right, last chance for Tyler. If peanut butter wasn't called peanut butter, what would it be called?
Peanut spread.
Pretty good.
All right, fair. All right, well, I think we'll wrap up there. So thanks for ending on a light note. Again, appreciate everybody's time. Super awesome, super fun. Austin has named a couple of people in chat. So Taylor Poindexter, engineering manager at Spotify, for best advice on whiskey. All right, cool. And also mentioned earlier someone to talk to Sierra Ford, a dev advocate, if you're interested in things like GraphQL. Not as fun as whiskey, but GraphQL is still pretty fun. But yeah, definitely appreciate everybody's time. Thanks for hanging out on the chat. If you hung out, if you're on YouTube, like, subscribe, do all the stuff. I'm bad at marketing myself, so you got to do it for me. Tell a friend. We'll wrap up here. Thanks again, everyone. We'll see you on Thursday, probably for another Q&A session for interview prep. And yeah, have a great week, everybody. Appreciate your time.
Bye.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Everyone, nice to see you all.